Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 57 of Mythicast. I'm your host, Spencer, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mythic Mikeala. We missed a month, but we're doing two this month. Let's go.
We got this.
We're joined by a special guest today. Adam, how's it going?
It's going all right. Had a solid weekend. Had a nice tournament finish, which I'm sure we'll get to in just a sec here. And then I had a business trip, which was a lot of driving, but I came back home and my dog was beside herself, so that was always nice. Pets are always just real happy to see you all the time.
Yeah, I love it when my dog, I walk in the house and my dog's like, this is the best day of my life. It's the best thing that's ever happened. It's always a good feeling. Just want to quickly mention that this podcast is sponsored by PureMTGO.com. You can check out a ton of Magic content there. It's a great way to get into creating Magic content. Reach out to them. They are awesome, and so is their sponsor over at MTGOTraders.com. Then also the Patreon, I did relaunch it. We have some things that we want to do to kind of adjust and make sure that we're doing the right things as we transition into a monthly podcast. But I just wanted to let people know that that is back up if you want to support the show directly. And then kind of the final housekeeping thing before we get into why we have Adam here is just that the Heezy Game Media Discord, we're going to be running the old challenges that we did where we gave away money to MTGO traders as a raffle for everybody posting their Mythic deck lists or their League deck lists, things like that. So head on over to that Discord and check that out. But with that being said, GP top 8 competitor and probably it's funny because I think actually at this point, Yoman, you are probably most known for your deck list dump at the beginning of format.
Yeah, fun fact, I'm the reason that Scryfall, the deck list page on Scryfall, now has pages that you scroll through, because my decks page on Scryfall took multiple minutes to load. So now there's multiple pages, because I do so many decks every set that they simply just do not fit on a web page.
That's freaking awesome. That's really awesome. I actually don't know this. When did you start playing Magic?
I started playing Magic when I was a little kid. I think on the shelves in stores was Fifth Dawn. Was the set that came out when I started playing Magic, but I was just playing like kitchen table Magic. And that might even have been like the set after, because what I really got started with Magic was just my friend's dad had a ridiculous box. Like, you know how people have like a giant box of random Legos in the basement? It was that, but it was Magic cards. And that was how I got started. We built just absolutely atrocious 80, 100 card decks that, like, we barely knew the rules. Rock's King of Beasts, I remember being the source of a couple of questionable rules interactions as I grew up. But I really started playing competitively right when I got off to college right around 2012. It was the Innistrad Ravnica standard, which was incredible. I know everyone always says whatever set they got in the competitive Magic is, that format was amazing, but that standard format was real good. And I really cut my teeth on competitive Magic with, at the time I did not know how impressive these people were, but I'm sure you know, and a number of listeners to the podcast will know, the CMU Pit Magic group. Where
I've actually never heard of this group.
Steve Rubin, Rich Shea. I've heard of them on like the receivables too.
Yeah,
Steve Rubin went on to become like a Plat Pro before going and
Steve Rubin won the
balance for Legends of Runeterra.
Yeah, I think Steve Rubin won a Pro Tour with Abzan, didn't he?
I don't remember if it was Abzan, but I do know he did win a Pro Tour. But I didn't know. I was learning, just getting my butt handed to me every Tuesday in the drafts, where it was a really good environment, and I really appreciated it, where it was like they were not afraid to essentially take your money, but they were also not really condescending at any point. And so it was just like I learned by getting beat over and over and over until I didn't get beat. And even people like Steve Rubin, like I will always appreciate. I don't think he even remembers me that well, but I remember like was prepping for a pro tour where like we have the post pre-release boxes. Everybody's got like, all right, you got a set, you've got a set, you've got like 6 sets, and we would just do team drafts. And Steve Rubin, while I'm just birding, asked me, "What do you think?" And I'm like, "I've been playing competitive Magic for like 3 months at this point. You're going to the pro tour, you're asking me, but like I didn't know about the pro tour at that point, and it was a really good, cool environment to learn in, and that's the kind of thing that I really want to pay forward. So
I think that what you're highlighting here is something that I've always felt was really true about the actual really good Magic players. You have a lot, especially in the time that you're talking about, like that 2012 time where like it was thought that you had to be like cutthroat and like the just very rules loitery, like, but the actual best Magic players and like the ones that I had a similar experience where like we would do $10 drafts at Oasis games with like Brian Hawley, who's now the head of play design and or like one of the leads on play design, and like Alex Sittner, who is multiple time Gold Pro, and like those people were the best players in my area have always been the ones that like also were the nicest, and because it really is that they got there through that in a lot of ways, and so I'm really glad to hear that you also want to pay that forward.
yeah, well, especially because part of the strength of that is that if you don't just like dismiss anybody, even if not everybody's input is going to be the most competitively viable, that doesn't mean there's no insight to be gained there, right? Where it's just like you can have different perspectives than somebody else, and even if you don't think they're right, you can go, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that specific problem before." So even if I have a different solution to it, that's good to think about. Like that hadn't occurred to me. And like people do the same thing in like I know you play Smash, these like fighting games where it's just like in any competitive endeavor, it's always good to still keep an open mind, because even if they have different or the wrong solution, they can still bring up problems you might not have thought of.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I gotta ask, what do you think the biggest lesson you've learned in Magic is up to this point?
It's definitely the ability to look at the tool set or the things that I have on hand and work on solutions both like top down and bottom up, of just like working from like what is the problem, all right, what do I have available, to what do I have available, what can I get done, and just being able to do that with sets or work or whatever's coming up has been really, really good, because it's one of the reasons I keep doing the 50 deck challenge, where it's like sometimes like sure 50 is a lot, but in order to get 50 like ideas that are actually good, not just like, oh, here's mono red splashing like 3 black cards, it's you really have to look at, all right, what do I actually have all available to me, and being able to look at like the big picture and put together things, even if they may not work out, just like, all right, here are options, even if they're not all great options, they are things I have if I have to.
That's awesome. Let's talk about the event that prompted us to kind of ask you to join the show today. You were able to participate in one of the MTG challenges this weekend, and you split in the finals of it with Mono Red Aggro. And Mono Red, if you followed challenge results recently, has put up a lot of top 16s in the challenges over the last, I'd say, about like month or so. But I actually think that, if I'm not mistaken, maybe only had one top 8 before this weekend, and then I believe that it also, your exact list took third the following day.
I actually didn't see the Sunday stuff because I was prepping for the work trip I mentioned earlier, but that's good to hear, because Mono Red, I think, has been right on the outside. Like there's been a lot, if you look through like the top 32 results, Mono Red's always kind of there. And right at the end of last season, it also had another big spike where there was 1 or 2 weekends where it was like 3 of the top 8, 3 of the top 8 the next day. Just because it's not, people give it a bad rap right now, because like Mono Red has over the years always been an option that people look at, because just getting people dead is also a form of card advantage. But it's been up and down lately just because there haven't been the highest quality of creatures and burn spells up until very recently. And even then, cards like Corpse Appraiser out of Grixis or Shieldred can be really tough to deal with if you don't have the right tools.
What do you think just this weekend was kind of one of your biggest takeaways for the deck itself?
The big thing is the mana efficiency, because right now in Standard, there are a lot of very efficient cards, but they're efficient at different things. Right? Bloodtithe Harvester is a removal spell and a creature that attacks well. It's something that efficiently in your deck it does multiple things while only taking up one slot. You have cards like Fable the Mirror Breaker that are just incredibly powerful. They do a number of different things for you. It can let you get ahead on mana if it's uncontested. It helps you dig through your deck and find the important cards. You can look at things like Invoke Despair, and those are also efficient in that you have one card and you're trading for 3 cards. Whether you're drawing 3 cards or getting rid of 3 of their things, very quote-unquote efficient card. But what Mono Red takes advantage of right now is mana efficiency and action efficiency, or action economy is the way I always put it. Because people always look at card economy and card advantage and how many cards up you can end up on your opponent. But if you can't spend all of those cards, if your action economy, you're only going to get one thing done turn, that's where Mono Red really shines, because it starts earlier, because there's a lot of really good 2, 3, 4, 5 curves in Standard right now. But Mono Red was basically the only deck that starts on 1. And then compounding that is everything has haste. So you're another like half turn or so ahead of everybody. And you end up being just so far ahead that even if your opponent plays a card on 2, plays a card on 3, plays a card on 4, plays a card on 5, they could just be dead anyway, because you played a 1-drop, they didn't. You played a 2-drop and attacked. They played a 2-drop. Now you played a 3-drop, and your 3-drop has haste. So you're still 2 cards or 2 attacks up on them, even if they can block. And if they can't block, they play like a Bank Buster on 2. They are so far behind that unless their turn 3 play is like literal Brotherhood's End, they're probably just dead.
Nice. So, was there any point in this event that you felt like a better player?
I mean, there's outplaying people, but there's also a couple things I picked up where it's like people always look at things like Mono Red, and I know the stigma has died down a little bit at this point because people keep harping on it, but people always think, oh, aggro decks are easy. You just play the card that you can play and you attack. But there's a lot of opportunity in there to still get an advantage over your opponent, where I had a turn where I realized my opponent, who was on the play, didn't play anything on their turn 2. And so their plan is somewhat clearly, like you see, like a Swamp on a Dragon Skull Summit, or not that, the Blackleaf Cliffs. And you know that their plan is to kill your turn 2 play. Because you played a 1-drop, they played a land, they didn't play a blocker, they didn't do anything else, they just said go. And what I did there was just basically played my second land so I could represent that I'm still going to play something for 2 mana, attack, and then also pass. And the opponent doesn't really want to spend their 2 mana removal spell on like a Phoenix Chick. That's just not favorable. But in wasting their mana, even though I didn't spend my mana, I know that because of the curve of Mono Red, I can still play all of the cards in my hand before my opponent can, because they're still going to be doing one thing per turn. Whereas I can play a 2-drop and a 1-drop later. I can play a 2-drop and a 2-drop later. And that way I can maintain being ahead. It's sort of very similar to when people play against control decks and you purposely don't play into their counterspell, because they're never going to be able to play their 3-mana counterspell and their 4-mana draw spell on the same turn. Not until way late in the game. And so it's the same concept of not letting your opponent use their mana, so that even though they clearly could use their mana, you're just not going to let them trade evenly on mana and continue to hold the advantage even by doing nothing.
This is something that you had mentioned in the Patreon Discord for CCMTG, kind of this action economy and this mana, kind of this economy of mana that's going on in Standard right now. And I'm kind of curious when you see how low the curves are for some of these mid-range decks. Even like if you think about like just the pure number of cheap removal, cheap creatures, cheap, like the format. One of the rules of engagement for the format is like these 3-mana enchantments in like Fable the Mirror Breaker and Wedding Announcement. Do you think that the fact that you get to take multiple actions, before like around them playing these big not big, they're like the whole thing is that they're cheap. But you get to double spell faster, I guess is the real point I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, it's like not only double spelling, but your spells somehow matter more because Wedding Announcement is a huge advantage over the course of like 4+ turns, where you're going to get 3 1/1s and the Anthem effect. However, the first turn they play it, it's just a 1/1. And there is nothing in the mono red deck that is profitably blocked by a 1/1. Just a chump block. But if they don't block, they're taking probably 6+ damage that turn. They've got a second 1/1 if they did nothing. They can double block one of your creatures. So now their 3-drop has not even done the advantage that it's supposed to because they're under pressure. And you can basically force this because it's not always just about double spelling or doing 2 things in a turn, but it's the fact that a lot of other decks are trying to do these very card efficient and individually powerful card things. Instead, you're exploiting that by just you're willing to play lower quality cards at a faster rate and have them matter sooner. Where Fable the Mirror Breaker, the most threatening part about Fable the Mirror Breaker, other than the first Shaman token, is like 4 turns later, when you can finally untap with the flipped Fable and have something else in play. And until that, it's not actually scary. And same thing for sort of Wedding Announcement, where it's only really scary if you care about the 1/1s or if it gets to flip. And until then, you have 4 turns to just keep your foot on the gas, and they can't get out from under that fast enough unless they have very specific tools, things like Shieldred or Graveyard Trespasser or Steel Seraph.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah. Also, I just want to say I like love that passing turn 2 with mana open and just being able to control the game as the mono red player. Like that is just. I'm actually like thinking about being on the other side of that and like how frustrated it would be in that situation. So that was really cool to hear.
Right, because what are you going to do? You're not going to not play your Fable on 3, right? You need to get that going so that you can get it scary. But then now you've put your shields down, and if they go shock your thing, play another attacker, continue, you're in such a terrible spot.
Exactly, and you get that damage in with that attacker too, and it doesn't just die immediately. So that's awesome. So we're talking about mono red. What actually made you decide to choose this deck for this event?
Well, the funny thing is, I didn't go into this thinking like, oh, mono red's really good right now. It was more just that like I've got a group of friends and a group of testing teammates getting ready for the San Diego RC. And one of the things on the list is, all right, we should look at mono red, find out, like basically, is mono red just kind of what a lot of people are viewing it as, like tier 1.5, tier 2? It's kind of a knowledge check of like, did your deck respect mono red this weekend, or is it actually good? And trying to find out that difference. And challenges are still one of the best, most accessible, powerful standard tournament, or like high-level standard tournaments that you can have access to right now, especially as they're getting back from their like 6-round to 7 or 8-round events where we had more than 100 players, I think, for both challenges this weekend. So I really wanted to get those reps in from the mono red side because I played it from the other side, but I want to make sure, always check yourself on, am I just like in not an arrogant way, but in a just like very little way, am I outplaying my opponents? Is my version of Grixis or mono white or whatever just set up for mono white? Or what is the truth of the matchup? Is it actually bad and I don't know that yet? And so that was one of the big driving things. And I took the trophy leader tweet. I don't know if we're going to be able to have that in the like podcast notes.
Yeah, I can put it in the podcast notes.
There's a tweet from, at the time, the current trophy leader with their mono red list. I basically looked at it. I was like, this seems basically mono stock. I changed a couple of cards just because a lot of the time when I look at a deck and I haven't had experience with it yet, I just pick it up and I want to play it before I change it. But one of the big things that I wanted to change was that I think Strangle right now is an incredibly powerful card just because it's a 1 mana removal spell that can trade up 2 mana, 3 mana. It's incredibly efficient right now. And I didn't feel a need for something like a Braid or a License Hearse because they solve problems that the deck doesn't look like it actually has. Because, again, the whole point is to put them on the back foot and then make their cards not matter. And so you don't need to answer Reckoner Bankbuster. You don't need to answer the, like, Attracts a Reanimator stuff in the same way. And so I basically changed a couple of cards and played what I had. And it was incredibly efficient as I just mowed through like Grixis and Mono White, but also the Soldier's Magic was a lot better than I expected.
You actually just did something that I want to highlight that's making me think about that Bank Buster comment, because you actually made a comment earlier too about how getting your opponent's life total down is another form of card advantage in some ways. And it's interesting because one of the first things that I noticed about your list is that there wasn't a Braids. It was something I was going to ask you later on, and we'll get to that when we get to your deck list. But like, what you said makes a lot of sense, where they're not going to be able to dirtle around anyway if I'm forcing the issue. So it's not, I don't need the Abrade. So go ahead.
And the other thing is, with the deal threes, you either want them to be able to go face, or when you have the option for Strangle, it is really hard to pass up. Sure, I could get the extra 1 mana to be able to kill artifacts and to get instant speed, but again, the goal is to have the pressure on and get under and make their plays as bad as possible. And Strangle is really good at that, because even if they have like some of the best 3-drops after, when you do a play like the past turn 2, or if they had to play like a Blood-Tide Harvester on 2, and you can play another 2-drop, or you can play like a 1-drop and a removal spell, you just want to be able to very efficiently answer those things, because you are, frankly, a 22-land deck, and you want to be able to deploy your threats and attack aggressively. And so you can't afford to have a turn where you played a Braid instead of Strangle or anything like that, where you want to make sure that your plays are as efficient as possible so that you can play the game plan that you have.
Awesome. Should we move on to the deck?
Sure.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and load up the deck for those viewing at home on YouTube. But for those audio listeners, I'm just going to read off the main deck really quick. So we have 4 Monastery Swift Spear, 4 Phoenix Chick, 1 Shivan Devastator, 4 Bloodthirsty Adversary, 3 Felden Ronin Excavator, 4 Squee Dubious Monarch, 4 Thundering Raiju, 4 Play with Fire, 2 Strangle, 4 Lightning Strike, and 4 Kimono Faces. Is it Kakazan?
I've usually said it Kakazan, but I will admit I do not know.
I actually don't know how to say that either. But I digress. I gotta ask.
Just post on Twitter. People will tell you how to pronounce.
It's true.
Yeah, but I don't know if they're right or not. We gotta get like the Watchy commentator style guy.
Yeah, there we go.
I got a Maro response this week, so
there we go.
You kind of already answered this question, but in a format with that almost has, I mean, Blood-Tide Harvester is like a huge part of the format. How is this creature deck winning in a format that has this cheap removal and these cheap threats that also act as removal?
Well, I mean, it's kind of, the answer is in the question, where it's just Play with Fire and Strangle are 1 minute answers to it. And again, it can't actually remove anything until it untaps, right? And so if they're forced to block, they're probably going to trade like that anyway. But you're not really down compared to any other removal spell or play, except that the removal spell also sometimes dies to your 1 mana removal, and then you're way ahead.
Yeah, well, you have listed here as your key card 1 is actually your 1 mana interaction, so those Strangles and those Play with Fires.
Yeah, it being able to remove your opponent's 2 or 3 mana threat for 1 mana leaves you so far ahead when your game plan is already to be at like a turn plus ahead. And it's this cascading effect of just, they have to play their like tap land, their tri land, whatever, because these decks only have somewhere between 10 and 14 untapped sources for turn 2, so their turn 1 is almost always tapped. Even if they have a cut down, even if they have Strangle in some of these multicolored decks, they still can't deploy it on turn 1 a good amount of the time, let alone if they're on the play and they have Strangle, they still can't do anything about it. And so you get to take advantage of the fact that their plays are scripted, except that your answers to it are better than their possible counterplay.
Awesome. For key cards too, you just have a Hasty Curve.
Yeah, Hasty Curve threats is just because you want to be able to play something, ideally play something on 1. And like, one thing I'll say real quick for people picking up the deck is, don't be afraid to not have a 1-drop, but the deck is mono good curves. So if your hand doesn't have a good curve, whether or not it starts on 1, ship it back. You can win on 6 cards, you can win on 5 cards, but you can't win a game where you either don't do anything. Like, there are very few 1-landers that I would keep, and there's also very few like 4-landers I would keep, because you want to be able to curve out and you want to be able to remove at least one blocker generally, where it's just like you want to go like Phoenix Chick into Lightning Strike into Squee or whatever, because Squee on an empty board, incredible. Squee into like their Corpse Appraiser, a lot less enticing.
Yeah, I got to play this deck today in preparation for the podcast, and I actually did win on a mulligan to 5. I think that this is one of those decks that you actually want to mulligan pretty aggressively with. I really like what you mentioned about the 4-land hands, because I think that, you know, every time that you mulligan away something like a 4-lander, what you're really doing is it's like you're almost cycling that land for a better card. And
the London Mulligan is super powerful for aggressive decks, in linear decks, and it can be very powerful in post-board games or in open deck list for reactive decks, but take advantage of it. If you know what you are looking for, your odds of finding it in a 6-land hand, in a 6-card hand where you put something back out of 7 is way higher than the thing you need being in the top 2 cards of your deck. And if you think about it that way, that will change a lot of how you think about mulliganing with a lot of decks.
Awesome. And then the last key card that you have put is a card that I have played an inappropriate amount of in this standard format, and that is Thundering Raiju.
Yeah, it may cost 4 mana in our aggro deck, but it is tasty. It is gigantic. It represents, whether or not you have another creature, it represents 4 damage, because you can either put the counter on itself on an empty board, or you put the counter on something else and get the direct damage plus the counter. It's still really good, even into things where it's like a face-up Wandering Emperor from your opponent, and you just like spread the damage around. The +1/+1 counters can make your threats attack into their blockers. It's just a very good, powerful card, where it's like 4 Squee, 4 Raiju is just what allows you to continue up the curve after playing some of that removal on like turn 2 or turn 3 and really hammer it home.
Yeah, I've played a ton of this card, and I'll just say this, that if you ever have 2 of them in play, you are just like 100% to win the game.
They should just be dead already.
Yeah, like, it is why. I mean, I have been playing a ton of mono red. Like, I've been playing mostly Gruul, where it's pretty common for you to get 2 of them into play, or like a Fable activation to copy one. But like, this card had an entire standard deck built around it last standard, and I think people forgot about it.
2 standards ago now, right?
Is it 2 standards ago now?
Because you're talking about red white modified. Right?
I was, yes. Yeah, fair enough. Go ahead.
That card just it makes your opponent respect that turn 4 play. Like, do they have the 4th land, and do I have to worry about this Thundering Raiju coming down? And maybe you don't have the 4th land, and they're making plays around you having 4th land, or you're just able to cast 2 spells instead.
Well, and that's the other thing is, again, because you keep putting them under the gun, you are taking away your opponent's options by putting them so far behind and putting them so low, so that oftentimes they can't really respect a Raiju. They have to play their like Corpse Appraiser or whatever and get their 4th land or whatever they have to do to make sure they're trying to not be dead. And Thundering Raiju is really good at slamming the door. And between Thundering Raiju, Feldon, Squee, you actually have a lot of outlets for your extra mana, in addition to what I know we're going to get to next. But so it's like, even though we are a 22 land deck and flooding is, I'm not going to lie, flooding is still not fun, but you have plenty of ways to spend your mana still.
Well, since you so kindly let us right into that, yes, the mana base for this deck is one of the easiest ones I've had to read in recent memory. So 22 lands total, consisting of 17 mountains, 3 Mishra's Foundry, and 2 Sokazan Crucible of Defiance.
Yeah, we can only play so many Mishra's Foundries just because we do want to be able to double spell, and double spelling in this deck is always red plus red, or sometimes with your triple spelling, it's just red and red and red. So you can't go too high on the colorless ones. And so Sokazan sort of fills that extra spot as additional utility lands. In this case, we really want them to be creature lands. And you do actually have legends in the mana base, and so it's not uncommon for you to go like squee into untap tokens on attack, because those 2 tokens are worth way more than that 4th land unless you have like exactly Raiju going on. And Mishra's Foundry getting in for 2, sometimes getting in for 4, and don't underestimate that second ability on that land. It's really powerful to just like attack with your 2/2, and they have to either take it or block knowing that it's a chump block. And it gives you a lot more agency. And again, the way that the deck keeps you ahead and keeps your opponent low takes away options from your opponent, and that is just really powerful. In the same way that like the joke is that like killing them is card advantage because they died with 7 cards in hand, but the more pressure you put on your opponent, the less options they have, and you're making all of their cards way worse than they should be.
Absolutely. And yeah, I've seen those 2 goblin tokens do work. So I can believe how powerful that is. So what's one of the coolest interactions that you've found in the deck?
There's not really a whole lot of interactions other than like Sokenzan is discounted by the legends. Raiju takes advantage of like the counter from Kamano Faces Kakazan. There's not a whole lot of interactions because it's not, the synergy is killing you. The synergy is not like we're not assembling A plus B. The whole point of everything having haste and everything being cheap and efficient is just that it's a very redundant deck, and you get to do the same thing every time, and you're just faster than everybody else.
I actually thought that the device on the Sokuzan and the Squee was actually cool. I had been playing the deck today and definitely had not thought to just pitch the land instead. So let's move on to the sideboard really quick. The sideboard that you registered had 3 Obliterating Bolt, 2 Bloody Betrayal, 3 Brotherhood's End, 3 Furnace Punisher. Card that I had not thought of before playing, and it overperforms. I just want to call that out. 3 Rebel Salvo and 1 Jaya Fiery Negotiator.
Yeah, and I will say I did tweet when I split the finals. I had tweeted like a slightly updated list. I'm still not sure about like the 4th Squee versus the 2nd Chief and Devastator, just because the Squee is really powerful where it's powerful, but against like soldiers and against like the mirror, sometimes it's not the best, and the flying on Chiv and Devastator and the ability to sink that extra mana is very powerful. But one of the big updates is in the sideboard, I do think you should have additional copies of Jaya. The card is really good against like Grixis and Mono White, where the matchups where you're still attacking, but you want a little bit of extra cardboard, where especially against Grixis, where things like Monastery Swift Spear are a little bit less exciting, because in order to attack through any of their stuff, you have to be casting your instants and sorceries, and they're still really vulnerable to things like cut down, and you don't want Swift Spear to have to require anything. You want your cards to require anything else. In sort of the same way that we just talked about, like there not being a whole lot of synergy, you don't want that to be required in order to attack. And so you take out some of your weaker threats, and Jaya can produce more threats while also still offering when you're ahead removal and offering access to additional cards to keep the gas flowing in the sideboard games where they're going to have heavier interaction. But other than that, a lot of it is just like Obliterating Bolt, Rebel Salvo, bringing removal for things where you just kind of need it. If you need to be able to kill Shieldred, and you don't always need to kill Shieldred. Sometimes you just attack in and remove their Shieldred. Sometimes you outright race it. But none of your removal outright kills a Shieldred. And the same reason that Obliterating Bolt is there is because you don't always want to spend 3 mana to kill the bigger things like Sarah Paragon or anything out of Mono Blue, where you just want to be able to remove their threats, even if it costs a little bit more, but you still don't want it to be the most expensive. And then Brotherhood's End is largely there because you need a sweeper in order to really compete against soldiers in the post-board games, and it's also okay in the mirror.
Yeah, I definitely was playing against soldiers today. I might have just already mentioned that, and I was like, this Brotherhood's End plus Jaya combo is actually kind of hot. I kind of wish I had another Jaya.
You do have to be careful, though, because Brotherhood's End does hurt Jaya.
That's fair. That's fair. You kind of talked about a few of these, but can you talk to me about like what your plan is against Grixis for sideboarding?
Against Grixis, you really don't want to sideboard too much. What I will generally do is if I'm on the play, I will trim 2 of the Swift Spears and like 2 Play with Fire, and bring in the 2 of the Rebel Salvos and 2 Jaya. I'll bring in the 3rd Rebel Salvo on the draw, just because on the play you are less likely to care about the Shieldred, or less likely to have the 3 mana removal for it, where you're more likely to be able to like attack in plus Play with Fire, or attack in plus Strangle, or whatever you have. And on the draw, I take out the extra 2 Swift Spears, just because, again, you don't want to draw cards that aren't real until you do something else. Whereas things like Squee, things like Thundering Raiju, things like Feldon are all just like threatening enough on their own. You don't have to do anything else to make them scary.
So when you're going up against an aggro deck, what cards are you thinking about bringing in, and what's coming out?
Really, you don't want to change too much. If you're playing one of the versions, like my list does not have it, but if you're playing one of the versions with an additional like Strangle or whatever other 1 mana removal in the sideboard, you do want to bring those in, just because they are trading cards as cheap as possible. It's very helpful. Brotherhood's End is going to be good, less because like it's not always just about it being a sweeper. Like against soldiers, obviously it's very important to sort of clear their critical mass, because otherwise you are going to get outsized and you're not going to have a good time. But even in the mirror, it's good simply because even if it's 3 mana, you're taking out 2 cards for 1, and the aggro mirrors posts board often slow down a little bit and turn into this weird who has the last threat standing, because you're both boarding up a little bit on removal, and it's less about being ahead because you're both going to be playing quick and fast. You're both going to be playing low to the ground, and it's a lot more about who has the last thing standing than about trying to get under one or the other.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess we don't have a whole lot of control decks in this standard meta right now.
Some people would argue Mono White is actually a control deck, because it's not really very mid-range. It never really plays the aggro deck.
There's so many versions of Mono White out there that I just like don't even know anymore. I've been playing VML, so I've seen like 4 very different Mono White deck lists. But yeah, if you're going against more of a control version of Mono White, what are you looking to bring in?
Honestly, this is where I think a lot of people trip themselves up. Because Mono White, all their 2-drops, they're 1/1s. They're Reckoner Bankbuster, they're 1/1s. All their 3-drops, they are enchantments that take forever to flip over and actually do anything. So you don't want to actually do too much sideboarding. I will actually generally just trim a little bit on either Play with Fire or Lightning Strike, depending on like what you see. Lightning Strike being a little bit stronger if you see something like Steel Seraph. Play with Fires can stay in if you don't see something like that, and you want to make room for your Obliterating Bolts. I don't bring in any of the Rebel Salvos. I will bring in Jaya, but like, again, you don't need to kill all of their X4s and X5s if you're killing them. And so you want a little bit of removal that can go there, but you don't need to bring in these 3 mana answers, because you'd rather continue just being way under them and punish them for just going, my turn 2 play is a 1/1. My turn 3 play will make a 1/1. And you just want to kill them before these 4, 5, 6 mana cards matter.
Kind of on the topic of control, in a lot of games right now, the mono blue quote-unquote tempo deck plays the control role in a variety of different matchups. Can you talk to me about that deck really quick?
I'll be honest with you. From everybody I've talked to on both sides of the matchup, that matchup's miserable for mono blue. They have no removal. Their earliest possible blocker is like turn 3. And if you Obliterating Bolt the Djinn that they play and cross their fingers on, they'd lose. It's such a brutal matchup because mono blue is taking advantage of their tempo advantage. The fact that they get to spend 1 or 2 mana to deal with your 4 and 5 mana plays.
Yeah.
They have so few outs to dealing with opposing 1 and 2 mana plays.
Yeah, as somebody who champions the mono blue deck quite a bit, I am sad to see mono red on an uptick.
Yeah, it is, I think, probably the most lopsided matchup in Standard right now.
Yeah, I guess you got put on camera last week live for VML playing mono blue against mono red.
Oh,
I won. I don't know how.
That's something to keep in mind, though. Is this comes up in all sorts of games. Even the worst matchup is not unwinnable. No matter what people may say in all caps in Twitch chat, I don't care. That's not how games work these days. Even a bad matchup in like Magic right now is like maybe 60-40, 70-30 if you're hyperbolic. Like, I'm sorry, there's mulligans, people get flutter screwed. No matchup is actually like 90-10.
Yeah. No, but I am so glad you brought that up because, like, yeah, I looked at that matchup on paper and I'm like, oh, this is not look good for me.
Do you have different sideboard plans for some of the other different mid-range decks, or are they all pretty similar?
It's pretty similar. It really depends where it's like you sort of look at your deck and you look at their deck and things like, is Swift Spear going to matter? Where it's like against mono white, it still takes them 2 tokens to even threaten a Swift Spear. Versus Grixis, they have like Corpse Appraiser, they could have Plundering Mine would trade. It's not like the worst for you. They have Blood Tithe Harvester, they have the Fable token. All these things can just like block and make you use removal spells that you don't want to use yet, whatever. But against like mono white, you can leave the Swift Spears in because they are even worse at answering your speed, and they have even fewer blockers for it. Whereas some of the other decks, it's a lot about looking at your threats and your answers, and if where possible, just making it more efficient. Are these lightning strikes overkill against some decks? Where there are some decks, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but like there are some decks where it's just like the difference between 2 and 3 is not huge, but the difference between 2 and 4 is big. Where it's like the Sarah Paragon decks or things like that, where it's like I can trim on lightning strikes because realistically, I'm not going to be pointing my removal spells at their face. But if they do happen to have one of these random X4s, I do need to be able to kill it. You play against like the Reanimator decks, and they happen to be the Jund version with like old Rotstein, for example. And so it's mostly just making sure that you can keep doing the same thing, and the cards that are there for a reason, your removal spells, your threats, are actually removing the things that matter or actually threatening.
Awesome. What deck do you want to play against the most? We kind of might have already answered it.
Yeah, we probably, it's like mono blue or mono white, you're just kind of like celebrating already, especially if you win the die roll. Like that's one of the things about this deck though, is that like losing the die roll isn't the worst. Winning the die roll, game 1 feels incredible because basically no deck other than maybe soldiers, and even those decks, like some of the versions of soldiers are only playing like 4 1-drops. You take your turn 1 play and you play your turn 2 play before they even untap, and they've already taken 4-5 damage, and you're just like, all right, what do you got?
So it sounds like you have definitely a plan against most decks, but what are the decks that you're hoping to avoid?
The big one is, I think there are some versions of Grixis that just like, they hate you. They know that mono red is like their least favorite thing, or they're just really ready for soldiers or Esper. That's actually probably the biggest one. There are some versions of Grixis where they're like 3 cut downs main, and you're like, okay, they actually can deal with me. Or the big one is Esper, and any of the Esper decks that have Denic or, God forbid, Phyrexian Missionary also main deck, where they play a 2/3 lifelinker on turn 2, and you have to have a deal 3 instead of a deal 2, and you can't attack into it with any of your 2/2s. And then they play Rafine, and they connive, and then it's a 3/4 lifelinker, and then it's a 5/6 lifelinker, and you are dead. Esper, especially the all creatures version, the Esper like mid-range version is a little bit less scary just because they have less of that curve out capacity. But when they're just like 4 Thalias, 3 Denics, 2 Phyrexian Missionaries, 4 Rafine, 3 or 4 Shieldred, like that matchup is actually probably the scariest one.
I don't know if did you get a chance to look at the list that you split in the finals with?
I believe it was a Grixis list, right?
Yeah, they actually were on 4 Darkslick Shore and 4 Blackleaf Cliffs and 4 Cutdowns in the 75. So I was kind of curious if you had any thoughts on like their approach to like they were ready for aggro decks. So I was kind of curious.
This is the more respectful version. They are still not on any Shieldred's main. They have like 1 side, and they have something like Whack for soldiers and Rafine and things instead of anything more for mono red. Like I do respect like the cut downs main, the extra 2 cut downs side, making sure they have untapped turn 1 black mana is, I think, a better approach to deal with something like this. I think that even with a list like this, I think mono red is still a little bit favored, but I think it is not untenable for Grixis. I think Grixis just has to respect it. They have to be very careful about because you're a mid-range deck and because you have so many options, you need to make sure that you have the right options for the right week. And it can be really tempting to try and out arms race the other Grixis decks, try and arms race mono white, which is a deck already trying to be just over the top of whatever Grixis could possibly do. Because the heavier you lean on like counter magic and things like Blade Coil Serpent, though I think that one's a little bit better than just like a giant pile of Invoke Despairs against mono red. Grixis itself is so wide, despite having like so many results, so many deck lists to pull from. There's just so much optionality that even a couple of changes, like if this list had like a Shieldred main instead of Blade Coil Serpent, that can swing the matchup a pretty decent amount, just because, again, with mulligans and with the amount of card draw that a lot of these decks have, they can see it even in these short games where it's like they play Fable, you kill their token, you attack them, but they still get like 3 more looks to look for that Shieldred before you attack them again.
So you brought up the life gain in Esper. So that brought me to a question. I've seen lists that play Giant Cindermaw, and I noticed your list has the Furnace Punisher in it.
I just don't think Cindermaw, like, it's a 4/3 trample. 3-mana 4/3s are really not what we're looking for in the current state of Standard. It doesn't have haste, which is like, I'm part joking, but part not, where it has to hit the battlefield, and then you have to either untap or they have to gain life in order for that to matter. Whereas Furnace Punisher it's got Menace, so a single creature cannot block it, and much like Shieldred, the first turn you pass, they're probably taking 2 damage, just straight up. And it's actually really good. People probably will not think about this, going back to some of the sideboarding. Against Soldiers, Punisher is actually very good, because they can't single block it, so it's very good for racing. It's a 3/3, so it beats some of their 2/2s and their 2/3s, even when you're stuck on defense. And they still don't play a lot of basics. They're playing Mirrex now. They're playing Seachrome Coast. It doesn't have to attack while still getting in for damage.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I think that's really helpful for people to understand when they're building sideboards and thinking about what their deck wants to be doing.
Yeah, shout out to my testing team for that, because that's just one that I didn't come up with that. I just out of the testing Discord was like, oh, noted, I'll bring that in against Soldiers. It was good all day.
What would you play this deck moving forward, I should say?
I don't know. If the RC was like this weekend, I would be either playing Grixis or Mono Red. That is what I would be playing, is one of those 2 decks. I'd like look at the field, see what I can think of, but I think those are my top runners right now, just because if it is a good time for Mono Red, I should just be playing Mono Red. Sure. If it is not, Grixis is probably something that can be tuned to fight the things that are low enough down. Things like Esper, things like Soldiers, where I'm not worried about those matchups too much. That might scare me off of something like Mono Red.
Awesome. We got one question from Twitter today. It was from Binary Soloist MTG. He says, playing Soldiers in Best of 1 Arena, I tended to get farmed by Mono Red decks featuring End the Festivities. Why didn't End the Festivities make your 75?
I don't know what the Best of 1 Soldiers list looks like on Arena, but on Moto and in a lot of results that I've seen, there's actually not a lot of Soldiers that die to End the Festivities. And if they have any of their Lord effects, I'm not remembering the name of the 2/2 right now off the top of my head, that just gives all their Soldiers +1/+1, or if they have
Sorry, I'm trying to remember it now.
Here, I have Goldfish on another monitor. One sec. Siege Veteran.
Oh, that wasn't even close. Oh, no.
No, Siege Veteran is a 3-drop. The Valiant Veteran. If they have either of their veterans, it's a bad time, because now your 1-mana removal spell that could hit a lot of things doesn't. And it's like, it is good against like Resolute Reinforcements and can hit like Thalia or Recruitment Officer, but I think it is too narrow compared to something like Brotherhood's End, where it's like Brotherhood's End you can also bring in the mirror. I definitely don't want In the Festivities main deck in game 1. Like, there are so few decks that it's actually good against, it's not worth it. And so I think it's mostly just a case of, it can be good sometimes against Soldiers, but Brotherhood's End is more reliable and has more matchups that it's good in.
I would also say that playing that matchup today, I was really impressed with Strangle as in a way to kill like the X3s in the deck.
Strangle is
So, and it being 1 mana, so that like if Athalia comes down, it's still relatively cheap too.
Yep.
All right, well that is going to do it. Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure that a lot of people have missed your voice on the podcasting world.
I haven't podcasted in forever.
So we really appreciate you. If people want to find you, where can they do that?
Yeah, I'm Adam Hernandez. I've been called Adam all cast, but you probably all know me more as Yoman5. I'm Yoman5 on Twitch, Yoman_5 on Twitter, because despite Elon Musk buying the website and the old Yoman5 account being suspended for longer than I've had a Twitter account, they still won't let me have the handle. So remember, there's an underscore on Twitter. And you can also find my work at TCG Player, infinite.tcgplayer.com. You can find all of my deck dumps, the 5 of 50 stuff, and the occasional work that I do for them there. I have mostly stepped back from writing and streaming, though that may change soon now that I am all settled in and competitive Magic seems to be back. The Pro Tour is back. I actually want to go hard on it instead of just being kind of wishy-washy. So keep an eye out. There might be more of that in the future.
Awesome. You can check out the rest of the Constructive Criticism Network at constructivism.com. You can find this show everywhere and leave a like, sub, and review. Since the last time we recorded, maybe not since the last time, but reviews are now on Spotify. So if you want to help the show directly, that is a great way to do it. Mikeala, where can people find you? Also, wait,
Mythic
did we
Mikeala?
congratulate you yet?
What?
Dude, because we haven't podcasted since then.
Oh, me?
Yeah, you.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, we're talking about you and your big giant check.
we congratulated Adam.
We did that at the beginning of the show.
No, I don't think so.
Congratulations. Tell the listeners what happened.
Thank you. So I went to MagicCon Philly, competed in the cosplay contest, and won Best of the Masters category.
Well done. Well done. I know how hard you worked on that, so I wanted to make sure we mentioned it.
Yeah, I don't want to clap too hard because my mic will actually pick that up, but that's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If people want to follow your cosplay journey, where can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Mythic Mikeala on every single platform. TikTok, pretty active right now. So follow for cosplay, random deck texts, or just jokes about Magic. I don't know. Whatever I'm in the mood for.
Awesome. You can find me at Switch13H. You can find me every week on Constructive Criticism and Need to Nerd. Every month here on Mythicast, as well as every month on Smash Through. Right now, I'm doing Magic coaching part-time. Actually, one of the people I'm coaching actually got to top 8 the challenge, the Sunday challenge this week. It was really cool to see results come in so quickly. You can email me at spencerhowland@gmail.com for that. Once again, congratulations on the great finish, Yoman, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course.
All right, we'll see y'all next time with another episode of Mythicast.
Bye.
Bye.